Hello and welcome back to another episode of Witchy Business. Today we are going to be doing another book club episode and sharing all of the books, all of the podcasts that we have been listening to and reading, how they make us feel, and we hope you enjoy it.
Yay! Love talking about books.
Yeah. Well, you have got a huge list of books that you want to talk about, so why don't you go ahead and start?
It's in those moments where I'm like, oh, I do read a lot. Yeah, and actually, after we did the first podcast about books, someone asked me, like, how do I read so much? And I'm like, I don't have a TV. That's my answer. That's just, I go to bed and I read before I sleep, and I go to bed before I'm tired, so I have time to read. It's it's like one of those things that I've actually like prioritized in my life because I've realized how good it makes me feel. And it's just, there was one day where I was like, I will never say that I've spent a nice weekend because I've watched a show. I'll be like, oh yeah, that show was super fun to watch, and like we've watched a few shows in common and we'll talk about them, but it will never be like a highlight of a weekend. I'll never be, when I used to come into an office on Monday, it was never, oh, I've had such a good weekend, I watched all these shows. Whereas if I had a whole like half day to read a book, I would consider that like something that I loved doing. And that was like an epiphany moment for me where I was like, it is the simplest thing to do in my list of things that I absolutely love to do. And from that moment, it just became like a conscious decision that I'm going to do more of that because it's what I really love.
I love that. It's such a good point. I do watch a lot of TV, like series, like Netflix or like Apple TV or whatever. And I find myself looking forward to watching it. So I'll be like, oh, I can't wait to just have like a whole day to just binge on this series. But then afterwards, you're right, like just reflecting on that, like days where I've like read a whole book in one day, I'm like, oh, that felt so good. Whereas when you watch TV, it doesn't feel like, I want to say like wholesome, like it's not wholesome. Like it's that's such an interesting point.
And I found like it's, I guess like because reading is more of an active task, it feels more mindful to me. And so I actually see the effect on my nervous system. And that's a big thing for me. Like reading is a way to get into my bubble, where I think like as a child, I realized that when I was reading, no one would come talk to me because a child who reads, like, oh, let's just leave her alone. And it has almost to a fault sometimes where I'll like completely retreat, and it's like my numbing thing. When emotions are too big, then I numb out and zone out by reading. But most of the time it's just something I really enjoy. So
I find that with watching TV though as well, it's like sometimes I just need to watch TV to like switch off.
But then it's like a conscious decision of like, I'm doing this because I want to switch off. And I have to say, I've had to like, it sounds absolutely ridiculous what I'm about to say, but it's like I've had to be okay with not knowing what a lot of people are talking about. Like people will talk about shows and I'm like, I've got no idea. And I guess in a way, it's been a bit of like a journey for me because as a child, I wasn't allowed to watch TV. I was only allowed to watch like Disney's or documentaries on nature if they were in English. Like it was the way my parents made sure that English was part of my life growing up, because I grew up in a French-speaking country. And so like my best friends will make fun of me because I don't know a lot of TV shows that kids watched when we were kids, like theme songs and stuff. I'm just like, I've got absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And so then I think I went through a phase in like my teens and early 20s where I would watch everything that everyone would be talking about because I wanted to know, to the point where I just then realized, well, that doesn't actually, like, it doesn't feel very fulfilling. And also, like, especially with reality TV, I really like notice how low it makes me feel. And so yeah, that's just like a conscious choice that I don't watch that anymore.
Yeah.
And that I watch more, that I read more books, because it's what I enjoy doing a lot more. So, but I still watch those. Like, I still need those moments where I zone out. And actually my mum and I got a Gaia membership, so instead of watching documentaries on Gaia, I'll put one in the show, one or two in the show notes, because I can't remember what they were called. I just like found them on there. But I've really been enjoying like having that, or watching that instead of a show on Netflix. The ones I really enjoyed were when scientists explain spirituality from a scientific point of view. That is, I could watch those things for hours. It's just I find that super interesting. So
yeah, I love that too. I think YouTube's really good for that as well, to be fair. Like, I really love YouTube. You can just get into like a scroll hole, can't you?
Yeah, but YouTube has ads, and that's my only issue.
Oh yeah, good point.
Yeah, so that's why, like, we got a yearly membership on Gaia, and we've been watching those, and there's all those like conspiracy ones that I kind of take with a big pinch of salt, but they're just nice to watch. And actually, I was watching a documentary on Gaia where they talk about the energy field and going to different like high points in the planet, of how it's all part of like an energy grid and working with that. And when I was watching that, it reminded me of a series of book that I started reading actually 10 years ago, called the Celestine Prophecy. And they came out in the 90s. So it's like full new age spirituality. But it's written like almost like I want to say a police novel, but that's not how you say it in English. It's like, there's like a whole part where they're being tracked by the police, and there's guerrilla armies that are chasing the ones who are trying to raise the frequency of the planet and stuff. So it's very novelized, but it's all about spiritual practices. And so there's the Celestine Prophecy, where they talk about the first 9, and then there's the 10th prophecy, the 11th, and the 12th. And so I just finished the 12th because it reminded me that I had those, and I just wanted to read more about that. So yeah, if you're interested in like new age spirituality and reading, I find it interesting reading things that were written 30 years ago, because that's when the first one came out, just to see what people were talking about back then, because it was like a revolutionary book. So yeah, I just think it's interesting to read things from a different point of view from what we're exposed to today. So
definitely. What else have you been reading?
I read 2 of the Henna artist trilogy, so very different novels set in India, in the 1950s and 30s, I think. And what I really love about it is that the main character, she works with plants. So she's a henna artist, but it's her way of like talking to women and bringing that intention in the drawings that she does on women, and then using different oils and flowers as ointments on the henna to treat them and to help them either conceive or actually not conceive. So it's like early contraception with plants, and it's that whole yeah, just a beautiful story. And it's just one of those novels where you're fully transported and I was going to say back in India, but no, you're just in India. But I mean, it's a country that I loved visiting. And so, yeah, it's just one of those lovely books where you're traveling from wherever you're reading. And I love those.
That sounds really good. Is it fiction?
Yeah, full fiction. Yeah, so the first one's The Henna Artist. And the other one is, can't remember. And the third one is The Perfumist of Jaipur. And so, yeah, you travel through India as well. And they live like first more like central India, and then they move to the north in the mountains. And she just talks about plants and stories of women. And yeah, so I really love that.
Yeah.
And, which made me, like, I had a conversation with a friend about it, and she pointed out that I read a lot of books from like BIPOC authors and a lot of women authors. And I think at the start it was like a conscious choice of like, oh, I need to read from authors from different cultures. And I think we spoke about this in the first book club episode, but how important I find that to read from different, like just like reading books that were written 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And reading from people who are from different cultural backgrounds, I find that really important, because it helps widen your perspective of what the world is, because you read the world through their eyes, and it helps you get out of, a little white woman privilege a little bit. So
yeah, absolutely, completely agree. Yeah.
And reading from women, there's just something more feminine and soft and poignant in the writing. And I think it's also helped me realize some things about what it's like to be a woman.
Yeah.
Things that you don't want to see, but you suddenly do when you read it from someone else. So yeah. And,
almost like the shadow side. Yeah.
And I really want to encourage people to read things that are completely out of your usual range, like I always said, I used to not like fiction at all, and now it's mostly what I read. And like, I don't really vibe with science fiction, like it's not really my thing, but I've read a few of them that friends recommended because they love them. And just to again widen your perspective of what's out there and learn something different from time to time. So well, on that I have been reading, I feel like you're not going to expect this, but it's like I have just been feeling like really pulled towards learning more about investing. And so I've been reading lots of books on investing in stocks, and I'm currently reading a book called Girls That Invest, and I love how she writes, because I'm having a blank on the author, but we'll pop it all in the show notes. But she started a podcast and it did really, really well. And now there's a book, and it's kind of like investing 101. And she talks a lot about investing in general, and how traditionally and still today it's thought of as a rich white male industry and thing to do. And there's a lot of like fear around investing, a lot of myths, and she really breaks it down. She talks about like, not only is there a gender pay gap, but there's also a gender wealth gap, because if women are paid less, that means they have less to invest in stocks, and so that then leads to a wealth gap. And she also talks about different minorities, different backgrounds, different cultures. She is based in New Zealand, I think, but talks about like lots of different industries.
but it really makes me feel so empowered, because it's simplified, and like, not simplified in like a kind of dumbed down way. It's just, it doesn't need to be complicated, and I'm realizing that now. And it's just making me feel really empowered, and I'm just loving it.
It makes me think about, I read a quote once from someone who spoke about women investing, and why am I struggling to say this? It could maybe it was her.
Yeah, maybe.
Anyway, she said women are told to invest in a Chanel handbag, whereas men are taught to invest in stock. And kind of says it all. It's just, we say, oh, buy this, it's such a good investment. It's a pair of shoes. Like,
and not only that, as well, is like, if the more the world of investing is kept like complicated, it's kept like that on purpose, right? And the more that happens, the more it does create a gap, like not just in genders, but just in the world, in different cultures and different backgrounds in general. And I think it's a really important conversation to have. And the more the more I immerse myself in this, the more I'm like, oh, I want to just tell everyone about this, because if more people know, then they can pass that knowledge down to their kids and to their friends. And so I mean, investing in a Chanel bag probably won't give you the same return on interest, but a Birkin bag will, by the way.
And that sounds like really interesting, and I feel like I should read it, because I think I've got quite spiritually infused limiting beliefs about investing.
I
expand. Like, I feel like when you're investing in stocks, it's so based on, you're spending money on nothing. And I really struggle with that concept of, what if you invested that money maybe more in a startup, and being like an angel investor in that way. So maybe they're not that limiting, those beliefs. Maybe it's just I need to focus on the ones that actually align more with my beliefs. Because things like, I had this big conversation with my dad once about investing in real estate. And because that's what he's always done. And I was like, yeah, but to a sense, you participate in gentrification and going into neighborhoods where rents are cheaper and houses are cheaper, and then buying them and turning them into investments, and then raising the prices of the rent and things like that, and then pushing people away from the center of cities and things. And I was like, I don't align with that. I don't think that's a good way of putting energy and money into something like that. There's, to me, better ways that you could use your money, and it's just maybe just finding those and putting not that I have money to invest at the moment, but that is more like something that I would want to think about. It's like crypto, great, decentralizing, main banks and things like that, but also the environmental impact of cryptocurrency is really, really negative. So like, I know people who do crypto mining, and then they have these rooms with air cons all day long, with computers turning to like, with different algorithms to crypto mine and to purchase and to sell crypto. And I really think like that's what our world needs at the moment. So I'm really open and interested in learning different ways to invest, and actually not just doing it how it's always been done, and just learning new ways to do that. So that's like a good book to read.
I think you will love it, because to all of those points, she goes into that. So she goes into all of the different types of stocks, all of the different strategies for investing, and also covering values and sustainability and what you choose to invest in. And at the end of each chapter, there's like a kind of action plan. And in one of the chapters, it's like, pick 3 causes that you're really passionate about, so that you can then research companies that, so for example, like, is sustainability a big value to you? If so, then you can invest in those types of companies. Or if you want to only invest in companies that have a 50% female male ratio, or do you want to invest in female owned businesses? Like, all of those things, you have the power to do that. And also, one of the myths that she talks about as well is I'm just picking up on what you're saying, because these are really common beliefs that I had as well. You need to have lots of money to invest, but you don't. You can just get started with, the times have changed. Like, we don't need to call up a broker. It's not like the Wolf of Wall Street. And even in that, she talks about how women are represented in the media, and how, for example, in the Wolf of Wall Street, the only female trader in that film was featured. She was doing a bet where, do you remember she had to like shave her head for $10,000 because she wanted to spend the money on getting breast implants? But she says, like, in reality, a female trader probably would have used that money to then reinvest, like, and so, yeah, we've just been like conditioned to have all of these beliefs around money. And so this book really does kind of dive into that. And it's gonna like answer all of that. Even crypto, I've not read it to the end, but I know that there's a section in that. But I really love what she stands for, like her values, her morals, the way she's educating. It's really good.
Yeah, it sounds like a book I'd enjoy listening to.
So I think it probably is an audio as well.
I'm gonna look up the audio for that one.
Yeah
I'm
empowered.
Yeah, that's it. It's just, I find like books have such a power to open up your mind to different perspectives, different cultures, different countries, different ideas, I just find it to be such an empowering tool, and a beautiful way to grow, and to just, I read books just on human stories. Like, there's no big story, there's nothing that you learn, but it's just a nice moment, and they just make you feel nice. So
What about podcasts? Have you listened to any good ones recently?
So I listened to an episode on Rich Roll's podcast, and I don't always like his podcast. Just wanna say that. I know a lot of people are big fans of him, but he did one with Rainn Wilson, who used to be on The American Office, and I kept seeing like bits of it on people's Instagram, so I was like, all right, I'm gonna listen. And the title was pretty compelling. It's Calling for a Spiritual Revolution, and it's part of Rainn Wilson's like press tour, I'm pretty sure, because he's on a lot of podcasts at the moment. So, and he's just put out a book about calling for a spiritual revolution. And I didn't have much expectations, but it was such an interesting listen. It's quite a long podcast, like maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours. So I listened to it in 2 or 3 bits. But they talk about religion, and spirituality, and how to integrate that in your life, and how, the title says it all, like calling for a spiritual revolution. He's really like encouraging people to get in touch with their spirituality and to bring that into their everyday life. And it's something that you and I are really passionate about. It's why we created Witchy Business. And I just found it very interesting. And he talks about his faith and how he grew up in it and then left and came back. And I won't say more because I'd really like people to listen to it, but Yeah, I really, really enjoyed that. It's the one that like stuck with me in the recent ones that I've listened to.
Yeah.
I mean, still listening every week to The Imperfects and to Rachel Braithen, which used to be Yoga Girl. And yeah, been getting into Africa Brooke's podcast as well. She did a really great one on imposter syndrome and how like sometimes it's not just imposter syndrome, is you are being an imposter, so you have to check yourself of like, is this the space that you should be in?
That's interesting.
Yeah, and she does like quite a few like controversial ones like that, which really
so like what would be an example of that?
Well, she's just like, well, maybe you're not an expert in your field and you shouldn't be the one talking about it. Maybe there's someone else who should be in that seat more, and like check yourself. Like, are you feeling imposter syndrome because it's a limiting belief, or are you feeling it because it's like a way for you to know that you need to learn more or integrate it more into your life before you can speak to it? So
love that. Yeah,
I found that to be a really good I was going to say conversation, but it's a monologue. So podcast to listen to. Yeah. I
listened to a good on the theme of rich roll. I think actually it was on his podcast, but I listened to it on Shetty's On Purpose podcast. And I, until you said rich roll, I was like, oh yeah, like that was it was the same podcast. So I think you're right, there must be some PR tour thing. Because Shetty says like, thanks for having me at your house. So but yeah, it's on the podcast is called 4 Steps to Improve Your Self-Awareness and Reach Your Goals, and How to Change Your Perspective on Rejection. But it sounds kind of similar. It's really on like spirituality, and Shetty shares like his journey. And if you're familiar with his journey, you know, he spent 3 years in an ashram and then comes back to London. He's integrating everything he's learned, and I really love hearing his story. And I found it a really insightful and inspiring listen.
Yeah, I should listen to that because I really like Shetty, and he's so, the way like he speaks so well. I think like before he became a monk, he was learning like how to be a speaker at uni. He did like courses on that, and then became a monk, and then came back, left the monk life, and makes me think of his book.
Think Like a Monk.
Think Like a Monk. I listened to it, and it was a great book to listen to just because it's read by him. And
I've not read it or listened to it.
And he reads it really naturally, and I think he wrote it as he would speak. And so you feel like you're just listening to a super long podcast. You know, like some audiobooks you listen to, it's like dry as, and you're just like, I need to read this because nothing's coming in. The way he reads Think Like a Monk, it's just like you're listening to his story.
That's really cool. He has a really compelling voice. And I mean, this episode, you said your one was long as well. This episode was like 1 hour 45 minutes, 1 hour 15 minutes, and I did look at it like, and that's actually an interesting question for everyone who's listening. Do you like long episodes? What's like your time for podcasts? Because I must admit, I did look at that episode and I thought, I don't have time for that. But I did listen to it in 2 halves. You know, I went out for a walk and then I came back to it, and that actually worked really nicely. But I think that immediate reaction was like, I'm not going to be walking for 2 hours, so am I going to carry on listening? But I did, because it was a really good episode.
And I guess like some audiobooks are like 12 hours, some are 5. It's just you can listen to it in bits. And what length of podcast do you like to listen to?
I actually I like a mix. Like I like it when my favorite podcast hosts have like a mix, because if I do listen while I'm walking, and I know you listen like in your home and stuff, but I can't multitask very well. So if I'm cooking, I'm not taking in the information. So when I'm on a walk, that's when I'll listen. If I know I'm going for an hour, I'll pick a podcast that's an hour. If I know I'm only going to be 20 minutes, I'll pick one that's, you know, shorter.
Yeah.
So if I don't actually really have a huge preference, if it's a long episode, I will listen to it in 2 halves. I think that was just a limiting belief that I had around the timing of episodes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess it's like, if there's a lot to say, like in this podcast, for example, there was a lot to say and it wasn't getting boring. But I do also like it. Some podcasts I listen to, they split it into two parts or 3 parts. And I think that works really nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or what do you think?
I like long ones, but I like when they go like into the depth of things.
Yeah.
And I find there's like, sometimes like the start will be a bit lighter and then it goes into a bit deeper, and I find I actually like quite long episodes, like quite long, the 45-minute to an hour and a half, like that's my favorite length for a podcast. I find like the lighter ones, the shorter ones tend to be a bit too light, and it's not really what I enjoy.
I think it depends what it is.
Yeah.
Because I listen to like quite a lot of educational podcasts as well. And sometimes like for me to retain the information, like I need it to be, whereas obviously if you're clicking on a podcast that's like tips on like 4 ways to be self-aware, or like whatever the name of that podcast I just said, like, you know, they couldn't have made that any shorter because it wouldn't have made sense.
Yeah. I think I like the conversation in podcasts. I like, you know, like feeling like you're part of a really deep and interesting debate or conversation.
Which is good because that's what we try and do here.
Yeah, and
I
don't really try to retain much information. I'm quite okay with like the not retain. It's like with the books. I mean, I'm not gonna remember everything that I read. And I started following this guy on Insta who was like hacks and tips to retain all the information about what you read, you know, the ones who speed read and stuff. And I'm like, but that's not the point for me. I just enjoy the process of it and like what it makes me think of, and like those moments where you just have like a little bit of a light bulb go off and sometimes I just go back and listen to that bit again, but then I like 10 minutes later you'll ask me and I'm like, I don't know. It's just like I'm not trying to retain much of that information, and I find it then just becomes part of my field.
Yeah.
You know, like I'll never be able to regurgitate exactly what they said, but it informs like, how I think, and it just allows like, again, like my perspective to broaden, which is what I enjoy. So
but if it's something like, for example, the investing book that I'm talking about, like I think because I'm not retaining the information right now, I'm kind of like, well, some of it I am, and I to your point, it's like I could probably talk about it from just not consciously retaining it, but because I've absorbed that. But what I've already been thinking is I want to just read it once and then go back and then action the steps. And I think that also is quite a good way to do it, because you're then just enjoying the process, aren't you? And then and otherwise it can feel a bit like a chore.
Yes, exactly. And that I really resonate with. And also just like you can pick up something, and then if you don't want to finish, you can come back to it later. Like it's it's not school. Like no one's behind you to come and talk about your book at the end of it, you know. Like you're not enjoying it, go give it to someone, put it in your bookshelf if it looks pretty, like I don't know.
Like I have a confession. James Nestor, Breathe, Breath. I was talking about that on the last episode. I'm still reading it. Well, I'm not like actively reading it, but I have put that down because it's not that I lost interest or anything like that. It's just that I fancied reading something else and I haven't gone back to it yet.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Totally okay.
Who knows when I'll finish it?
It really is. And I think a lot of the time we just tell ourselves like, oh, I need to finish this book because I started it. No, just don't.
Yeah.
It's really okay to not finish it. Like, yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, let us know, everyone who's listening, what you have we got
We've
more?
got something very exciting.
Okay.
In 2 days, the 8th book of the Seven Sisters comes.
I was just about to ask
It's
you, when
in
is that
2
coming
days.
out? 2 days. Are
2
you
days.
serious? I did not know that. I thought
Yeah.
it was like July.
No. Like my friend who also read it, she messaged me last week and she was like, 1 week to go. And I was like, the fact that I know what you're talking about.
But you've already pre-ordered it, haven't you?
Yeah,
I have not, so I need to like get hold of this.
It will
somehow.
be on my Kindle the minute it comes out.
I wonder if it will be on my library book app.
Maybe.
I need to be online like in the morning.
Oh my god, we sound absolute. The level of excitement that has just like.
Oh my god. I have a friend who is reading them at the moment. I recommended them to her, and every now and then she'll message me like, oh my god. And she's just finished Cece's book, The Sun Sister.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, I just love it. And now she's on to the next one. It's so exciting to hear someone else go through that journey.
It really is a journey, those books.
Yeah.
Yeah, so book 8, 2 days.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was big.
Yeah. That is big. Okay. Yeah. Well, everyone who's listening, let us know what you're reading, listening to. We want to hear your recommendations too.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
We'll be back, I'm sure. Well, we'll be back next week, but we'll be back in a month or two to talk about more books, pods, and documentaries and stuff. So,
yeah.
See you soon.